What if the place you thought would be your safe haven was hiding something far darker than you could ever imagine? What if every step you took brought you closer to something that wants you there forever? This isn't a story about ghosts. It's a story about the things that never let you go. Stay with us. You'll wish you hadn't. It was an old, weather-beaten house at the end of a desolate road in a forgotten town. The locals had long avoided it, whispering about its haunted history. I had never believed in ghosts, but when I inherited the house from a distant relative, I felt an odd pull to move in. Maybe it was nostalgia for a family I barely knew. As I walked through the creaking door, I felt a chill, but I dismissed it. It was just the weather. The house would be my new beginning. The first night was uneventful, at least on the surface. I unpacked, explored, and settled in. However, as midnight struck, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps above me. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. The house was old, but it was supposed to be empty. I hesitated, then grabbed a flashlight and ventured upstairs. Nothing. Yet, the cold air lingered, and the sense that I was being watched only intensified. The days passed, and I began to hear more. Whispers, faint but distinct, seemed to emanate from the walls. Sometimes they sounded like distant conversations, other times like mournful sobs. At first, I thought I was losing my mind, but then one night, I woke to see a shadow moving across the hallway. It was tall, thin, and had no face. I blinked, and it was gone, but the temperature in the room had dropped significantly. Among the items left behind in the house was an old, ornate mirror. It stood in the living room, framed in tarnished gold, reflecting a room that no longer seemed familiar. As I gazed into it one evening, the reflection shifted. I saw a figure standing behind me, a woman in a tattered white dress, her face obscured by long, matted hair. I spun around, but there was nothing there. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was imagining things, but the mirror's glass seemed to pulse with an eerie glow. By the end of the week, I felt as though I wasn't alone. It wasn't just the whispers or the shadows. There was a weight in the air, a presence that hovered just beyond the edge of my vision. I could feel it breathing down my neck, especially at night. One evening, I awoke to a freezing coldness beside me in bed. I turned, expecting to see a draft, but instead, I saw a figure, a woman with hollow black eyes, staring directly at me. I screamed, but when I blinked, she vanished. While cleaning the attic, I found an old record player and a collection of dusty vinyl records. Curious, I set it up and played a random album. The crackling sounds echoed through the house, but then the music stopped abruptly, replaced by a low, guttural voice that seemed to speak directly into my ear. "You shouldn't have come here." My heart skipped a beat. I turned the record over, but it was empty. The silence that followed was unbearable, heavy with malice. The next day, I discovered strange symbols carved into the walls of the basement. Symbols I didn't recognize. They were arranged in a circle, and as I traced them with my fingers, I felt a jolt of energy surge through me. Later that evening, I found a journal hidden beneath the floorboards. The pages were filled with frantic writings. It watches, it waits. The house is its prison. The entries grew increasingly desperate, as though the writer had been trapped in a living nightmare. I couldn't escape the nightmares. Every night, I dreamed of the house, its dark hallways, the shadows moving just out of reach. In these dreams, I was being hunted by something far worse than a ghost. There was a presence, something ancient, its eyes gleaming with malice. I woke up every morning drenched in sweat, my heart racing. Yet, the dreams continued, each one more vivid and terrifying than the last. The whispers began to take on a new tone, more urgent, more desperate. I began to understand them. They weren't just random murmurs. They were pleading for help, Get out, they whispered, before it comes for you. I laughed it off, attributing it to my mind unraveling from pressure. But when the doorbell rang one night, I opened it to find a woman standing in the rain, her face twisted with fear. She grabbed my arm and whispered, "Leave now before it takes you too." Before I could ask who she was, she vanished, leaving me standing in the dark. I had no choice but to leave, but as I packed my things, something in the house seemed to stir, to awaken. The walls groaned and shifted as if the house itself was alive. The final moment came when I tried to open the door to leave, only to find that it had sealed itself shut. My breath quickened as I backed away, only to hear the familiar voice, soft, chilling, and full of promise, whispering from the darkness, "You can never leave." The house had always seemed cold, but on the first night, it felt like a different kind of cold. The air was thick with an oppressive stillness that settled into my bones. I had dismissed the strange noises during the day, convincing myself that it was simply the house settling. After all, it was old, but as darkness enveloped the house, the silence grew unsettling. I lay in bed, listening to the distant sound of something faint, but there, footsteps, shuffling, moving across the floor above me. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. It was the kind of sound that made you question reality, the kind of sound that no rational mind could explain. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was the wind or perhaps an animal in the attic. But the longer I lay there, the more real the footsteps felt. They were too deliberate, too clear. The house was supposed to be empty. I was the only one living here. As far as I knew, my pulse quickened, and I got out of bed, grabbing the flashlight from the nightstand. My feet felt like they were walking through thick mud, each step heavier than the last. I made my way to the hallway, where the moonlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows on the floor. The silence now felt oppressive, almost suffocating. I stood in the middle of the hallway, straining my ears to hear any sign of movement. Nothing. I slowly made my way upstairs, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The air grew colder with each step I took. When I reached the top of the stairs, I froze. The attic door was slightly ajar. I had not been up there yet. The idea of venturing into that dark space made my skin crawl. Still, I could not shake the feeling that someone was waiting for me. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. The stairs creaked as I descended into the darkness, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the thick shadows. The attic was vast, filled with old furniture, trunks, and forgotten memories. I scanned the room, every part of me on edge, waiting for the slightest sign of movement. And then I saw it, a figure barely visible in the dim light, standing in the far corner of the attic, facing away from me. My breath caught in my throat. It was tall, impossibly thin, and it seemed to flicker in and out of focus, as if it were made of smoke. My legs turned to stone, my mind screaming at me to run, but I could not. I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the figure. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, before the figure slowly turned. Its face, pale, gaunt, and devoid of any expression, was a mass of emptiness. Its eyes, dark and hollow, locked onto mine. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, and before I could react, the figure vanished. It simply melted into the air, as if it had never been there at all. I stood in the attic, my heart racing, my hands trembling. The room was empty, silent, as though nothing had ever happened. I stumbled backward, struggling to make sense of what I had just seen. Was I dreaming? Had I imagined it? The house seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for me to make a decision. With a final glance around, I turned and fled back down the stairs, slamming the attic door behind me. I locked it, but deep down, I knew the lock would never hold whatever was in that attic. I crawled into bed, pulling the blankets tightly around me, my mind racing. The footsteps above me had stopped, but the feeling of being watched lingered, pressing against my chest like a heavy weight. Sleep never came that night. Every creak, every groan in the house felt like the beginning of something worse. I could still see the figure in my mind's eye, its cold, lifeless gaze burning into me. It was like I had woken something, and now it was waiting for me to make the next move. But deep down, I knew I was already too late. The following days passed with strange unease hanging in the air. The house, once silent and still, had begun to feel alive in ways I could not explain. The whispers, faint at first, grew louder each day. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. No, these sounds were different. They were human, distant, but unmistakable. At first, I told myself it was my mind playing tricks on me. It had to be. Stress, isolation, the sheer strangeness of living in a house like this. It was bound to affect my senses. But the whispers, they didn't feel like they came from my mind. They felt like they came from somewhere deeper, from within the walls, from the very foundation of the house. They echoed through the rooms, soft at first, and then gradually clearer and more insistent. Help me? It was a voice, a woman's voice, weak and full of despair. It seemed to call from behind the walls, like someone trapped in a distant room, unable to escape. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself it was just the house settling. But then the voices became more distinct. I could hear them clearly now, and they were not just whispers. They were full conversations, frantic and broken. One night, I was sitting in the living room, trying to read, when the whispering started again. Only this time, I could hear more than just one voice. There were two, then three, all speaking over each other. Panic began to rise in my chest as I leaned forward, straining to make out the words. I can't, I won't, one voice sobbed. Please, don't leave me, another begged. I stood up, the floor creaking beneath my feet. I moved toward the hallway, each step feeling heavier than the last. The voices seemed to follow me, whispering in my ears, growing louder as I passed from room to room. I was certain I wasn't imagining it now. The house was alive with voices, real, desperate voices. I made my way toward the basement door. It was as if the voices were coming from down there, calling out to me, reaching for me. The chill in the air grew more intense the closer I got to the stairs. I hesitated for a moment, my hand resting on the cold brass handle. Something in my gut told me not to open that door, but the voices, they were calling to me. I descended into the basement, the darkness enveloping me as the light from the hallway slowly dimmed. The temperature dropped dramatically, and the air grew thick, almost suffocating. The whispers were now screams, frantic, pleading. As my flashlight flickered, I could see the outlines of old, forgotten furniture in stacks of boxes. But there was something more, a presence, something unseen lurking in the shadows. I moved deeper into the basement, my flashlight beam scanning the walls. And then I saw it. At the far corner, there was a figure, faint at first, but becoming clearer with each second. A woman, hunched over, her long hair tangled and matted, her body trembling as if she were cold, or worse, afraid. She didn't move, didn't acknowledge me. She simply stared, her eyes wide with terror. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, and I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The voice in my head screamed to turn and run, but I couldn't move. I couldn't take my eyes off her. Please, help me, she whispered, her voice so faint it barely reached my ears. The floor beneath me groaned as if in protest. My flashlight flickered once more, then went out entirely, plunging me into darkness. The screams of the woman filled the basement, drowning out the rest of the voices. The walls felt like they were closing in. I could hear her, feel her desperation crawling up my spine. I fumbled for the flashlight, my fingers trembling, but as I turned it back on, the woman was gone. The basement was empty. Still, the voices, however, remained. They echoed in my mind, their whispers now inside my head. "Help us," they begged. "You are the key." The walls, the floors, the air itself seemed to pulse with an energy that was both terrifying and magnetic. It felt like I had stepped into something far beyond my understanding. I didn't know what the voices meant or who they were, but I could feel the truth sinking into my bones. I wasn't alone in this house. And whatever was here, it was waiting for me to find out just how deep it went. After the unsettling events in the basement, I could no longer pretend that the house was just an old, creaky building. It was alive with something dark, something ancient. I had tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but each day, the feeling grew stronger, the whispers more urgent, the shadows darker. I had started to feel like a stranger in my own home, haunted not just by the house, but by something far older, far more malevolent. In the days following my descent into the basement, I tried to avoid the lower levels of the house. I stayed mostly on the main floor, retreating to the living room or kitchen, anything to keep my mind occupied. But there was one thing I couldn't ignore. The mirror. It had been left behind in the living room. An ornate, full-length mirror, framed in tarnished gold. It seemed almost out of place amidst the dust and decay of the house, its surface gleaming even in the dim light. I had walked past it a few times without much thought, but that morning, something about it drew me in. I stood in front of it, staring at my own reflection. I looked tired, gaunt, like I hadn't slept in days. My face seemed pale, my eyes sunken. Yet there was something else in the mirror, something not quite right. It was subtle at first, but when I took a closer look, I saw it. A flicker of movement in the reflection. I blinked, stepping back slightly, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. But then I saw it again. In the mirror, I wasn't alone. There was something standing behind me, a figure tall and thin, its face obscured by long, matted hair. I whipped around, my heart pounding, but the room was empty. I turned back to the mirror, my breath shallow and rapid. The figure was still there, standing behind me, its presence cold, suffocating. It didn't move, didn't speak. It simply stared. And I realized with a creeping horror that the reflection in the mirror wasn't just a mere copy of the room. It was different. The air in the reflection was darker, heavier, as though the mirror showed a version of the room where time and space didn't quite follow the rules. I reached out a shaking hand toward the glass, the surface of the mirror cold and smooth beneath my fingers. And then, in a flash, the figure was gone. The reflection of the room returned to normal, just as it had been before. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering in my chest. My mind raced. It had to be a trick of the light, some weird optical illusion. There was no way that something could have been standing behind me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that mirror was watching me, waiting for me to look again. I couldn't stop myself from returning to the mirror later that evening. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, I found myself standing in front of the mirror once more. This time, I didn't hesitate. I needed to know. I looked into the reflection, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. The room was empty, as it should have been. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it again. The figure. Its shape was clearer now. Its body twisted in a way that defied logic. It was no longer just a silhouette. The woman's face became visible, pale and gaunt, eyes black like two empty voids. Her mouth stretched wide, grotesquely wide, as if she was about to scream. I froze. This time, I couldn't look away. I couldn't pull myself from the mirror's hold. Her eyes seemed to lock onto mine, the air around me thickening, suffocating. In that moment, I understood. The mirror was not just a reflection. It was a gateway, a doorway, and I had been foolish enough to step too close. The reflection of the woman opened her mouth, her lips curling into a silent scream. It was then that I realized this wasn't a mere image. She was reaching out to me. I stumbled back, terrified, my breath caught in my throat. As I fell to the floor, the mirror's surface seemed to ripple like water, distorting and warping. The woman's figure stretched out from the mirror, her hand reaching toward me. I screamed and pushed myself away, scrambling toward the door, but the figure's hand kept coming, its fingers almost brushing the edges of my skin. Just as her fingers were about to touch me, I slammed the door shut, cutting off the vision. My pulse raced, my body drenched in cold sweat. The house was silent once more. But I knew this was only the beginning. Something was awake now. Something I had unwittingly stirred, and I could not escape. I could no longer pretend the house was just an old, forgotten place. It was something else, something sinister. The whispers had returned, louder now, more insistent. The mirror, the figure behind it, all of it was becoming too much to ignore, but despite the fear gnawing at me, I felt a strange compulsion to continue. The house was hiding something I was meant to find, and I couldn't stop myself. The night after the mirror incident, I couldn't sleep. I lay wide awake in bed, my eyes fixed on the shadows that stretched across the walls. The house groaned, settling as it always did, but tonight it felt different. The silence was broken by a faint sound, something scraping, soft and rhythmic, as if something was slowly being dragged across the floor. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound was coming from the wall. I knew the house had its creaks and groans, but this was different. The sound was purposeful, deliberate. It came again, a low scraping, followed by what sounded like a soft thud. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and moved toward the source of the noise. My hand hovered over the wall, where I could feel the faint vibrations running through plaster. The scraping continued. It was almost like something was trying to break through from the other side. I didn't know what was happening, but I couldn't stop myself from pushing against the wall. My fingers ran along the surface, feeling for any irregularities, any hint that something lay beyond it. And then I found it, a small, almost imperceptible seam, where the wall didn't quite meet the baseboard. My breath caught in my throat as I pressed harder, feeling the wall give slightly under my hand. The sound of the scraping stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, unsettling silence. I pulled back, my mind racing. This wasn't just an old house. This was something far more twisted. I took a deep breath and grabbed a nearby hammer from the toolbox in the hallway. I couldn't explain why, but the urge to see what lay behind that wall was overpowering. I swung the hammer with shaking hands, striking the scene with all the force I could muster. The wall cracked and a small section of it crumbled away, revealing a narrow, dark passage hidden behind it. I hesitated. My body screamed at me to turn away, to leave the house and never come back. But something in that passage, something calling me, kept me rooted to the spot. I stepped forward. The narrow corridor ahead swallowed by darkness. The smell of old dust and mildew filled the air, and I felt the temperature drop, the chill sinking into my bones. I flicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The passage was tight, barely wide enough for me to walk through, but it stretched deep into the bowels of the house. The walls were made of old stone, damp and cold to touch. I moved slowly, my footsteps echoing off the stone walls, the light from my flashlight casting eerie shadows that danced around me. It seemed to go on forever, but finally I reached the end, and there, in front of me, was a door. The door was made of dark wood, intricately carved with strange symbols I didn't recognize. The carvings twisted in ways that seemed to move, like they were alive, breathing. The door stood slightly ajar, as if waiting for me to enter. The voices I had heard before, those whispers that followed me, grew louder now, filling my head, urging me to open it. Help us, please. It's too late. I reached out, my hand trembling as it made contact with the door. The wood was unnaturally cold, and as I pushed it open, a wave of damp, musty air hit me, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of decay. Inside the room, the air was thick and oppressive. It was completely dark, save for a single candle in the far corner, its flame flickering wildly. The walls of the room were covered in old, peeling wallpaper. In the center of the room, there was an altar, an old wooden table, stained with something dark and rusty. My flashlight flickered as I stepped inside, its beam catching on something in the corner. I turned slowly, my breath catching my throat as I saw what lay there. A figure, a woman, or at least what was left of one. Her body was skeletal, twisted in an unnatural position, as though she had been there for years, maybe longer. She was dressed in ragged, torn clothes, her eyes wide open and unblinking, staring straight at me with a gaze that seemed to pierce into my very soul. I stepped back, my stomach churning. The whispers were louder now, more frantic. It's too late. It's coming. I turned, and that's when I saw it. The mirror. It stood against the wall, the same mirror from the living room, gleaming and untouched, as if it had been waiting for me. I could see my own reflection in it, but it was different. I looked tired, broken, my face pale, drawn, but behind me, in the reflection, the woman from the altar stood, her mouth open wide, her lips stretching grotesquely, and she let out a sound that wasn't a scream, but something far worse, a low, guttural moan, as if her very being was twisted with pain and rage. I turned, and the room was empty. The altar was gone. The woman was gone. The door slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. The walls seemed to pulse with the sound of whispers, growing louder, pressing against my mind. The house was no longer a home. It was a prison, and I was the one it was keeping. I was trapped. The door to the hidden room had slammed shut, sealing me inside. The air grew thick, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in around me. I could hear the whispers again, louder this time, more distinct. They filled the room, echoing in my head. They weren't just voices anymore. They were feelings, emotions, raw and desperate. Fear, anger, despair. It was as if the house itself was alive, feeding off of them, growing stronger with every passing moment. I pounded on the door, my fists bruising against the wood, but it didn't budge. It was as if the door had merged with the wall, part of the very fabric of the house. I could hear the faint scraping sound again, this time coming from all around me, as if something was crawling beneath the floor, moving within the walls. The feeling of being surrounded, trapped in an inescapable nightmare, was overwhelming. I turned to the mirror once more. Its surface gleamed in the candlelight, and for a moment, I thought I saw something moving in it, something behind my reflection. I tried to turn away, but the pull was too strong. I couldn't look away. I was drawn to it, as though it was calling me, beckoning me to step closer. And so I did. I took a hesitant step toward it. The closer I got, the more I felt the weight of the room pressing against me, like the very air was thick with something malevolent. I reached out, my fingers brushing the surface of the mirror. It was cold, colder than any glass should be. And then it happened. The reflection shifted. The room in the mirror was not the same as the one I stood in. It was darker, the air heavy with a choking darkness. The woman, the skeletal figure from before, stood there once more, her eyes wide open, staring at me from within the mirror. Her mouth open and her voice low, guttural, reached my ears, though her lips didn't move. It's too late. The words seemed to reverberate in my skull, drowning out everything else. I stepped back, horrified, but my feet were glued to the floor. The woman's eyes locked onto mine, and I couldn't move. I couldn't look away. The whispers grew louder, frantic, desperate. "Help us. You're the key. We've been waiting for you." A rush of memories slammed into my mind. Images of the house, of people long gone, of faces twisted in pain. The woman's eyes burned into me, and I understood. She had been trapped here. She had been part of this house for far too long. Her spirit bound to it, waiting for someone to set her free. I reached out to touch the mirror again, but this time, my hand didn't stop at the cold surface. It passed through the mirror. A sharp, cold sensation shot at my arm, and before I could react, I was pulled forward, my body crashing into glass. But instead of breaking, the mirror bent, warped, and then I was inside. The world around me shifted as if the air itself had turned liquid. The room I was in felt distorted, stretched like some twisted version of the one I had just left. The walls were darker, suffused an eerie glow that cast grotesque shadows everywhere. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of decay. I could barely breathe. The woman was standing in front of me now, her eyes wide, her mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. It felt like I was being held in place by invisible chains, bound by something far stronger than fear. And then something else appeared. It was a figure, tall, shadowy, its features indiscernible, its shape ever-shifting. It seemed to watch me, its gaze cold and knowing. I felt its presence in every fiber of my being, like it was searching my soul, reading my every thought. "You should not have come." The voice was a whisper, but it was all around me, in my mind, in my bones. It felt ancient, the voice of something that had been waiting here, dormant, for centuries. I wanted to fight it, to flee, but I couldn't move. The figure moved closer, its shadow wrapping around me like a suffocating embrace. "You are the key," it said, the words sending a shiver down my spine. The woman reached out then, her cold fingers grazing my arm, her eyes filled with desperate pleading. "You must set us free," she whispered, and with those words, I felt something snap inside me, like a thread had broken, and I was suddenly no longer in control of my own body. I was no longer in control of myself. The house, the dark force behind it, was alive. It had been waiting, watching, and now it had chosen me. I tried to scream, but no sound came. The air around me felt thick with a presence that was both suffocating and all-encompassing. I was no longer sure where the house ended, and I began. The dark force, the one I had awakened, was here with me, in this twisted, alternate version of the room. The woman, her skin stretched tight over brittle bones, still held my arm, her grip unyielding, pulling me toward the altar at the center of the room. Her eyes, wide, hollow, endless, bore into me with a desperation that I couldn't escape. "You must finish it," she whispered, her voice low, almost like a chant. "The ritual, you're the one they've been waiting for, the one who will set us free." I tried to pull away, but the air around me thickened, and my feet felt as if they were sinking into the ground. It was as though the very room was feeding off my resistance, pulling me deeper into its grip. The shadows shifted, moving of their own accord, and the tall, shadowy figure I had seen before appeared again, looming, shifting in the corner of my vision. I couldn't look directly at it, but I could feel it watching me, studying me, feeding off my fear. The altar in front of me was old, worn, and covered in ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly glow. Atop the altar lay an object wrapped in tattered cloth, a dagger with a blade so dark, so sharp, that it seemed to absorb the light around it. I recognized it instantly. The same blade had been shown to me in the whispers. It was the key to ending the curse of the house, to releasing the trapped souls that had been bound here for centuries. The woman stepped away from me, moving toward the altar with a grace that was unsettling, her skeletal form gliding across the floor as though she wasn't entirely bound by the same rules as I was. Her gaze never left mine as she stood beside the altar, her thin, bony fingers tracing the edge of the dagger. "It's time," she said softly, as if speaking to herself. "It's time for you to finish what was started. You're the one who can release us and end the house's reign." I didn't understand. Release us? The house had been dead. There had been no one left. But the more I looked at her, the more the shadows whispered, the more I understood. The house wasn't dead. It was feeding, waiting, and it had been waiting for me all along. The woman lifted the dagger, her thin, pale hand trembling as she held out toward me. The dark blade gleamed with an unnatural hunger, and a sickening chill crept through my veins as I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "No, no, this can't be real," I whispered, my voice barely audible in the suffocating silence. But even as I spoke, I could feel it, the pull, the need to end this, to finish what was started long before I had ever come to this house. I reached out, my hand trembling as it made contact with the handle of the dagger, and then the room seemed to come alive. The shadows twisted, the walls closing in, the air growing colder still. The whispers escalated, becoming a cacophony of voices, all calling out at once. "Help us. End it. Set us free. Kill her. Kill them all." The tall figure, no longer a mere shadow, stepped forward. Its form was vaguely humanoid, but its eyes were hollow, empty pits of darkness. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The woman's voice returned, soft and pleading. You must end the ritual. Use the dagger. The house cannot be freed until the final sacrifice is made. The soul must be offered." The dagger felt wrong in my hands. It was as if it was made for someone else, for something else. I could feel the weight of the curse upon it, the weight of centuries of suffering. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to drop it, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The woman stepped closer, her bony hand resting gently on my shoulder. Her skin was cold, colder than the air around me. "Do it," she whispered. "This is the only way to end it." And then, for the first time since I entered the house, I realized what she meant. The ritual, the blade, the sacrifice, it was not about freeing the trapped souls. It was about binding them, keeping them in place. They needed a new vessel. I was the vessel. I couldn't breathe. The weight of it, the terror of it, hit me like a wave. My hands began to shake uncontrollably, but I didn't drop the dagger. I couldn't. The tall figure moved closer, its shadow swallowing the room, as though it had been waiting for this moment, for the blade to be raised, for the sacrifice to be made. It was too late to turn back. I had no choice but to make a decision. With shaking hands, I raised the dagger high. The shadows pulsed around me, their energy coiling like a snake ready to strike. The woman stood still, her hollow eyes watching with a twisted satisfaction. The house would have its price. I stood there, the dagger raised high, the weight of the decision crushing me from all sides. The woman, her hollow eyes gleaming with something like hope, watched me intently. The room was closing in around me, suffocating me with the oppressive weight of centuries of suffering, of ancient rituals and dark forces. The air was thick with their hunger. I could hear the whispers now, louder, more frantic, pleading. "Do it. End it. Free us. Take her place." The tall, shadowy figure stepped closer, its form stretching, bending in unnatural ways. I could feel its presence pressing against me, like it was inside my mind, inside my thoughts, weaving its way into my very being. The dagger in my hand seemed to hum with energy, an energy that didn't belong to me, that had never belonged to me. It was as though it was calling to something within me, awakening a part of myself I had never known existed. This is it, the final choice. I could feel the darkness closing around me, the walls of the room narrowing, the shadows stretching out to consume everything. My breath came in shallow gasps, my fingers numb as I clutched the hilt of the dagger. The woman's voice echoed in my ears. You must, for them, for me. The house cannot be freed until the soul is taken. And then I understood, this wasn't just about me. It wasn't about escaping or surviving. It was about the house, a living, breathing thing that had existed for far longer than I had known. The house was feeding. The house had been feeding on them. The lost souls, the tortured spirits, the countless victims it claimed over the years. It had been waiting for a new soul to claim. My soul. I could feel the cold of the dagger seeping into my skin, into my very bones. A voice, my voice, echoed inside my mind, warning me, telling me that this was wrong, that I couldn't give in. But it was too late. The choice had already been made. I didn't know if it was a house, the ritual, or something else entirely, but it had consumed me. The whispers filled my head again, now urgent, relentless. They were no longer pleading. They were commanding. Kill her. Take her place. The figure moved closer, its presence overwhelming. I could feel the darkness pressing against my chest, like it was squeezing the life out of me. My vision blurred, the shadows now swirling, merging into one mass of blackness. And then in that moment, I felt a surge of cold, and the woman's voice, soft, pleading, rang out once more. You have to choose. You have to release us. End the curse. I didn't know how much time had passed. I didn't know how I was still standing, still holding the dagger. All I knew was that the house was demanding something from me. It was taking what was left of me, piece by piece. But then something shifted, a flicker of light. For a brief moment, the shadows seemed to retreat, and I saw her again. The woman. Her form was still twisted and frail, but now there was a softness in her gaze, a quiet sorrow that made my heart ache. She wasn't trying to deceive me anymore. She wasn't trying to make me feel like I had to sacrifice her. She was asking for release, for freedom, not for more suffering. The room began to distort again, the air heavy with a palpable sense of dread. But this time I understood. The house was feeding on pain. The souls trapped here, they were not evil. They had been lost just like me. I wasn't meant to sacrifice them. I wasn't meant to sacrifice myself. I was meant to break the cycle, to tear down the house. But it wasn't just a matter of raising the dagger. It was a choice, a final decision that would determine everything. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I let go of the dagger. The cold steel clattered to ground, its dark energy fading with a soft thud. The woman stepped back, her hollow eyes narrowing. The tall shadow moved forward, but I stood firm. No, I whispered, my voice shaking but resolute. No more. The room seemed to tremble, and for the first time, the darkness faltered. I had made my choice. The house could no longer claim me, could no longer claim anyone else. I would not be a part of its twisted games, its never-ending hunger. But the cost of my decision was not yet clear. I could feel the energy of the house, its hunger, fading, but there was something else. A weight, a final, desperate whisper that seemed to fill the room. The house was angry. The house had been betrayed. But I stood my ground. I had no idea what would happen next, what the house would do in its final moments of fury. But I wasn't afraid anymore. The darkness was lifting, and the house was dying. The house trembled, a deep, guttural rumble that seemed to shake the very foundation beneath me. The walls groaned, and the air grew thick with an oppressive weight. It felt like the house was alive, twisting and writhing in its final moments of rage. The shadows that had once seemed so infinite were retreating now, pulled back into the dark corners where they had lingered for centuries, but they weren't leaving quietly. The woman, her eyes now filled with something darker, something far more ancient, stepped back, her form flickering like a fading flame. The tall, shadowy figure moved toward me, its presence suffocating, pressing against me like the last breath of a dying beast. I could feel the coldness of its gaze, the overwhelming sense of loss and anger emanating from it. "You've made a mistake," it whispered, its voice a low, rasping hiss that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You cannot undo what has been done. The price must be paid." The woman, too, seemed to falter, her frail form shaking as though she was struggling against the same pull that had dragged her here in the first place. She had wanted freedom, but now, in this moment, she was beginning to fade, like the house itself was slowly erasing her very essence becoming one with the building that had consumed her life so many years ago. "I never wanted this," I whispered, feeling my heart pound in my chest. "I never wanted to be a part of this." The air was thick with something ancient, something far beyond the house itself. It was as though the building had always known that the end would come, this final act of defiance, the breaking of the cycle, and in its death throes, it wanted to take me with it. It wanted to drag me down into the depths of its hunger and suffering. The room seemed to bend around me, the very fabric of reality warping as I stood frozen in place. I could feel the house's pull on me, urging me to surrender, to let it take me, just as it had taken so many others. But I wouldn't. The woman's form flickered again, and in that moment, I saw her, really saw her, for the first time. She wasn't just a victim. She wasn't just some lost soul caught in the house's trap. She was something more. She was a warning. Her eyes, wide with fear, held a deep sadness. But there was something else there too, something that gave me strength. Her lips moved, her voice barely audible above the now thundering tremors of the house. You can stop it, but you must act fast." I looked at her, my heart heavy with newfound understanding. She had been trapped here, yes, but so had I, so had all of us who had walked into this cursed place. And now it was my turn to make the final choice. The dagger was still on the floor, the dark energy of the house pulling at it, trying to reclaim it, but it was no longer mine to wield. The house wanted a sacrifice. It wanted a soul, but it wasn't going to get mine. With every ounce of strength I could muster, I stepped toward the center of the room, toward the heart of the house. The shadows swirled violently around me, reaching out to drag me back, to pull me into the abyss with them. But I wouldn't go. I wouldn't let the house win. As I reached the altar, I glanced down at the floor. The ground beneath me seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, as though the heartbeat of the house itself was coursing through the floorboards. The whispers had stopped now, and in the eerie silence, I realized the truth. The house was dying, but it wasn't done yet. I reached down, my hands trembling, and grabbed the dagger. The cold steel burned against my skin, its energy still dark, still filled with the remnants of everything it had touched. The final sacrifice. But I wouldn't give in. Not this time. I raised the dagger, my hand steady now. The shadowy figure loomed closer, its form becoming more defined, more tangible. It was growing desperate. It knew what I was doing, but I was not going to be its victim. The woman's voice echoed once more, soft but clear. "It's time, finish it." And with those words, the house's grip on me loosened, even if only for a moment. I could feel its power slipping away, its essence fading into the walls, the ceiling, the very air. The house that had once been so alive, so insistent, was crumbling. The shadows had lost their hold on me. With one last desperate breath, I drove the dagger into the altar, The moment the blade made contact with the wood, the house shuddered. The walls cracked. The shadows howled in protest, and a wave of energy exploded outward, so powerful that it felt like the entire house was being torn apart from the inside. I staggered back, my hand still gripping the dagger, as the house began to crumble, the very foundation shaking beneath my feet. The shadows writhed, retreating into the corners, vanishing into the cracks in the walls. And then silence. The house was still. The air was no longer thick with oppression. The cold that had suffocated me was gone. The shadows had disappeared. The woman, the soul that had once been trapped here, was gone too. For the first time since I entered, I felt the weight of the curse lift from me. The house, the thing that had tormented me, had finally collapsed. The walls that held it together had disintegrated, leaving nothing but dust and echoes. I stood there, the dagger in my hand, the destruction around me so complete that I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The house was no more. But at what cost? I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I was free. The air was still, impossibly still. For a long moment, everything around me seemed suspended in time. The ruins of the house lay before me. Its once imposing structure reduced to rubble. The walls, the floors, the shadows that had clung to every corner, gone. I stood there, the dagger still in my hand, now an insignificant relic of everything I had just endured. The weight of what had happened, what I had done, hit me like a wave. The house was no longer breathing. The curse had been broken. But at what cost? I looked around, the silence pressing against my ears. There was no sound of whispering, no creaking of floorboards, no rattling of chains. The house had gone quiet, as though it had exhaled its last breath. I felt no more presence around me, no cold, no suffocating energy, just emptiness. The woman, her form, her spirit, was gone, and with her, the other souls, the trapped, the lost. They had been freed, or perhaps they had simply ceased to exist in the way they once had. It didn't matter. They were no longer part of this place. I dropped the dagger to the floor, the cold steel clinking as it hit the dust. My hands were trembling, my body exhausted, but there was a strange clarity in my mind. I didn't know how long I had been in that house, or how long it had been since I first stepped through the door. Time had twisted in that place, distorted and endless, but it was over now. I turned to walk away, stepping over the rubble and debris, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin for the first time since I entered. The outside world had not changed. It was the same as it had been when I first arrived, before the darkness and the fear had taken hold of me. The world was still turning. Life was still going on, untouched by the horrors I had faced. But I was different. I walked for what felt like hours, but my steps felt lighter. With each footfall, I could feel the weight of the house lifting from my shoulders. The burden that had clung to me for so long was finally gone. I was free, and yet the freedom came with a price. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left behind, something important. The house had consumed so many lives, mine included in some way, and even though it was gone, I couldn't forget what had happened. The house had taken part of me, and in return, I had taken part of it. I had broken the cycle. Yes, but the scars it had left would never fade. In the distance, I saw the outline of a town, a faint smudge on the horizon. The world beyond the house was waiting, ready to move on, oblivious to what I had just survived. And maybe that was how it should be. But as I neared the town, I couldn't help but wonder, what if the house wasn't truly gone? What if its hunger, its darkness, was still out there, waiting for the next victim? What if it had just been waiting for someone else to come, someone else to awaken it again? But I couldn't let that thought consume me. I had survived. I had broken free. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that I could start over. I didn't know if I would ever truly escape the memories of that house, or the faces and voices that haunted me. But I would try. As I stepped into the town, the sun sinking slowly into the horizon, I realized that maybe freedom wasn't about forgetting the past. Maybe it was about moving forward in spite of it. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the darkness following me. The house was gone. And so was I. The house is gone. Its dark grip finally loosened. But what if the shadows still linger, waiting for the next soul to step inside? The story doesn't end here. There are countless other mysteries to uncover. Countless other horrors lurking just beyond the veil. What lies hidden in the forgotten corners of the world? What forces remain unseen and untold, waiting to consume all who dare to uncover them? If you journey with me through this terrifying tale, know that this is just the beginning. There are more stories, more darkness, and more secrets waiting to be uncovered. Are you ready to face what comes next? Subscribe, follow, and stay tuned for the next chilling adventure. The darkness never sleeps, and neither do the stories that lurk in the shadows. Until next time,